This is part 2 of this series. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, go watch that in the description. This video starts off right after the really long time lapse in the last video. With all the buttons and stuff laid out, what we're going to do now is code the pause menu. Keep in mind, before we go into this, that what I do may not be 100% accurate to what you do. When I was making my pause menu, I actually did the coding as I added in the assets and stuff. So while what I'm teaching you here is best practice, it's only really 100% applicable if you're redoing something you already did. While you're coding your pause menu, 20 minutes from now you might realize you forgot to add some panel that you forgot about. That's fine, add it in, change your code if necessary, move on. But before we code this, I want you to do these two things. Take note of my organization in the pause menu. I've organized everything as separated sort of folder, if you will, as much as I can. Like how you would organize your assets here, you should organize your pause menu too. So for example, in this black square, in the image, I've got the 4 panels that will appear. I've got current game settings, I've got next game settings, and all I have to do, even though I haven't named everything, which you should name everything a short, easy, and simple name. That's best practice. I can easily recognize everything at a quick glance. For example, the exit button here, I also have the text and the image that goes along with it, and that just keeps everything nice and clean. Same goes for the continue button and everything else that's similar to that. Now what you're going to want to do, now that we've set up the pause menu, is in your game manager. If you don't have a game manager, just create an empty game manager, and the scripts, create C# script, just name it game manager CS. In the update section, go if input dot get key down is keycode dot escape, and what that returns is a bool. So if what happens is if on that frame somebody presses their escape key, it will return true. If somebody doesn't, or if they just type something else or nothing at all, it will return false. So if we do an else, that's basically doing the equals true for us. And that's basically the false for us. What we can do here is add in a game object, public game object pause menu. And now in the if statement, type pause menu dot set active true. Now what we're going to want to do is actually do a check, see if it's already active. Dot active self equals true. Well, actually, we don't even have to do the equals true. So this is basically, if the pause menu is visible right now, then we run this code. And if it isn't, then we run this code. So if it isn't, what do we want to do? We want the pause menu to appear. So we set the active to true. And if it is active, what do we want to do? We want it to disappear. So we'll do pause menu dot set active false. Now we don't actually need this if statement, so I'm going to delete it. Now in the game manager, all I have to do is assign this one object. And now when I press play, goes on and off, on and off, on and off. Now what we want to do is the pause menu logic. You'll notice that when we click the back button, nothing happens. Exit game, continue buttons, the other buttons that we want, none of it actually happens. So the first thing we're going to do, make sure that you're off of pause, create a pause menu script. We're actually going to put all these buttons and methods in the same script so that we know where they all are, because creating a new script for every single button isn't good practice. Just do pause menu. So while we still have the game manager script open, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 4 booleans. Public bool is on panel 1. Now I'm going to duplicate that 4 times. 2, 3, 4, except for number 1. Set them all to false just to be sure. You'll see why we use that in a second. There was also one thing that I forgot to tell you to do, and that's to set the time scale to 0. Now, if you have some animation at the top here, like I do, and you actually do want to stop all time in the game on the escape button pressed, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set the update mode to unscaled time. That way the animation plays. Otherwise, what you'll find is that the animation stops when we open our pause menu. So this next step, again, if you just want a menu without the pausing effect, don't do this. Time.timescale equals 1, or whatever you want the value to be. Time.timescale equals 0. Basically what that does is it just pauses everything in the game. It sets all wait for seconds, it multiplies it by that time scale, and all animations are multiplied by that time scale. Probably among other things, but those are the 2 main ones. Now what we're going to do is we're going to attach this pause menu script to our pause menu. Let's first code the exit button. So we'll do public void exit. We'll just remove the start and update methods because we don't need them, at least for now. Basically, all we want for the exit button to do is, in this case, have it take us to a different scene. So in here, in our scenes, I have the main menu and I have the sample scene. So what I'll do is I'll go into the build settings. Both of those are in the scenes and build. Main menu, sample scene. What I can do is say using Unity engine.scene management. Can say is scene manager dot load scene 0, which would be the main menu, and now we have an exit game button. In order to implement this, what we have to do, go to our exit game button, the button component. On the on click the plus, drag in the pause menu, exit. There we go. Now we have a simple implementation of an exit button. You can see it takes us to a different scene. Continue. We just want this to be a replica of what the game manager does when you press escape and the pause menu is still active. So we'll just say public void continue. False. In the hierarchy, drag in yourself. Now you ask, if we're just using all the methods from this one script, because we're going to do that for the continue button, the exit button, why do we have to specify this object when it's literally just yourself? And the reason is because when you click a button here, what happens with the method is, well, yes, it does call this script's method, it still counts things like this as this object. So while it's calling another method, it is still technically calling it within its namespace, I guess, for lack of a better term. There's probably proper terminology for that, but if you do it through code, you'll notice that's what's going to happen. Continue, drag this in, pause menu, continue. Now we have a proper implementation of the continue button. If you want to play sound, something like that, you can also implement that in there too. For the back buttons, what we'll have now, this back button, change it through the panels whenever you click it. So public void back. Now what we want to do is say public game manager. What we can do now is assign it in the inspector. So here's where those bools that we created earlier come in handy. Game manager dot is on panel 1. Else if game manager dot is on panel 2. Duplicate that. Else change that to is on panel 3. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to do separate methods, because since we're going to be cycling through all this, let's say you're on audio settings. If you click back, it'll then take you to graphic settings. Basically what we're going to be doing is just whatever happens if you click the button here. So what I mean by that, I'll show you. Current game settings, we'll create 4 different methods. Public void, and we'll just abbreviate them. Current game settings click, and then just duplicate that 4 times. Next game settings click, graphic settings click, audio settings click. And now if it's on the panel 1, then we'll just do continue. If it's on panel 2, we'll just do current game settings click, next game settings click, and then graphic settings click. Now all we have to do is fill in what these methods do here. What you can also do is in current game settings click, do pause menu, drag in your pause menu, current game settings click, for next game settings click, drag in the pause menu again, pause menu, next game settings click, for the graphic settings, drag in the pause menu again, graphic settings click, the audio settings, pause menu, audio settings click. So current game settings click, what do we want to do when we click this button and we're on a different panel? What we want is for this current game settings panel to appear in the black box and for all the other ones to disappear. So we'll do 4 different panels now. And then we're also going to have to change the color of the gear and the text and the actual asset of the button too. So we'll do public game object. Now all we have to do is drag and drop them in. Here, image 2, 3, 4. 1, 1, 2. Oops. 3, 4. And now all we have to do in current game settings, panel 1 dot set active true. Make all the other ones false. 2, 3, 4, false. Now all I have to do is copy and paste this in here, change up which one's true. And now we know that is going to work, so all we have to do is figure out how to change the color of the gear, the opacity of the asset of the button, and the color of the text. So if we go in here, this is where putting it under the actual button comes in handy. We can see that image and text, right? We can use getChild0.getComponentImage, change the color easily, getChild1, change the color of the text easily, and just use getComponentImage to change the opacity of the image easily. Now we're going to say button1.getComponent, and make sure you're using unity.ui. .color, this is unfortunately the only way to do it, equals new color 1f 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 1f. Now duplicate that 4 times. Button 2, take a component image.color and just change that to 0 0 0 3 4. And now all we have to do is say button1.get.transform.getChild 0, and that's an image component get component image dot color equals new color 0f 0f 0f. We're not going to ever change the alpha, so no reason to put the alpha number there. And now we just duplicate that, say button 2, button 3, button 4. And for the rest of these, we're going to want it to turn white, so we'll just do 1 1 1 1 1 1 1. Now we copy and paste this, and then we change them like we did the previous ones. And now we only have to do this one more time for button1.transform.getChild1 get component text dot color equals. Duplicate that 2 times. Now let's copy and paste here. Alright, now that we're doing that, we should have a fully functioning pause menu. There we go, you can see the panels appear. Oh, we forgot to do one more thing. We forgot to change what is true in here depending on the panel of which the game manager is on. So on ACS, what we want to do is say game manager dot is on panel 1 equals true. Duplicate that. 2, 3, 4. False. False. More copying and pasting. Now it's time to drag in the pause menu here. Pause menu, back. Looking good. Something seems to be wrong here. The reason the back button in this recording is broken is because I made a coding error in the original recording. It's been edited out though, and so you don't have to worry about that. Your pause menu back button is working fine, if you follow my code, that is. Now the essential functions of your pause menu should be working. On to the individual tabs. Now the first thing I'm going to do is work on the next game setting. Now the reason I'm starting with the top tab is because the next game settings is the easiest to implement, and after I do the easiest to implement, I'll then work on the hardest to implement. So what am I trying to do here? Well, remember next game settings is 2 toggles. What I want is for, when I click on this toggle, something to remember that this setting stays on while this one stays off, even between game sessions. Alright, so real quick, in the original recording of this, I screwed up, did something that kind of really didn't make sense, so ignore all the methods and stuff you see in the pause menu script. You're going to add them later, I'm going to show you how, just you haven't added them yet. So now what we want to do is we want to have this toggle. You see that, you know, it's interactable, we can click on it, but nothing actually, let's say this actually changed a setting, nothing would actually change at this point, and worst of all, it wouldn't save in the player data. So when we click this, we want something to happen, and we want to be able to say what happened. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use something called player prefs. Now player prefs is Unity's built-in system of saving ints, floats, and strings, and you'll see how to use it in a second. So back in your pause menu script, create 2 new methods. Now since these are just test settings for now, I'm going to just name them setting 1 and setting 2, and then drag and drop them on the inspector. Now you're going to want to make a game object array as big as how many buttons you can click. So public game object array. I'm going to name this all NGS buttons equals new game object array 2. And now I'm going to assign them in the inspector. Now I'm going to do is back in the methods, I'm going to say player prefs dot set. In my case, since they're toggles, they can only be on or off. I'm going to make it an int and use 0 as false, 1 as true. You'll see player prefs, you'll see two things pop up, string key, int value. So the string key, I believe how this is stored is in some text file. This is the key to whatever you're saving. By the way, you can't have set int and save that with a key, and then also have a set float with the same key name or a string with the same key name saved in the player prefs. They will overwrite each other. Now player data, remember that, test setting 1, and then comma 0, since we're going to be false, but that's not going to work because that means every time we click this, it's going to turn it off whether the check is on or off. So what we're actually going to do is if all NGS buttons 0, because this is the method for the first toggle, dot get component toggle dot is on. Now, how this actually works, you'd assume we'd put this in here, right? If it's on, we turn it to off. That's not what we actually want to do. You see this is on value right here, right? It's off right now, the toggle's off. When I click on it, and it fills itself in, and then it runs this method. What we're actually going to have to do is we're going to have to set this to 1, which would be our true, because if it's false, it's going to turn the is on to true, and now we're going to check whether the is on is true or false, if that makes any sense. And then else, change that to 0. And now for setting 2, we change this to 1, change that to 2, we change that to 2. Now we have something that saves on click. So the question is, I want to clarify this real quick because I've seen some games make this mistake, and that's why do we save the player data based on what the toggle shows and not what's already saved in the data? Why do we do the if statement on whether the toggle is on and not whether the player data is 1 or 0? And the reason for that is, say the toggle gets out of sync with the player data, what would happen when you clicked a toggle is the exact opposite of what you would want happening. That'd be a very weird issue to try and fix. So what we're going to do now is we want to code something that on start goes in here and turns these toggles on or off based on what's saved in the player data. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to make a string array. You'll see why in a second. All NGS keys equals new string array. And with this, and now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy in all the keys that you have. Make sure you get it right, otherwise you're going to have to change this through the inspector. And if we want to change this to all NGS keys 0, you can. I'm going to, because if you, let's say, you would make more of these test settings, it would be easy. All you'd have to do is duplicate this and then replace this 0 to a 2 or a 1. So now in start, we're going to do a for loop. Now, because I have two settings, I'm going to want this for loop to run twice. For int I equals 0, I is less than 2, and I plus plus. We're going to do an if check. If, and then we're going to say NGS keys I, oops, I forgot to add the player prefs dot getInt. And the default value is going to be off for me, which is 0. I recommend you do a default value, otherwise it's going to return null. So the default value is basically the value that this will return if it can't find any value assigned to the key. And equals 0. All NGS buttons I dot get component toggle is on equals false. Oops, I did a wrong equals. And then else all NGS buttons I actually just duplicate this. Let's set it to true. And now this is going to for loop through each of this. It's going to find the key for this. It's going to say, is this false or is it true? Make the game object false or true, and then go to here. False or true, make that game object false or true. And by game object, I mean toggle. Now, there is an issue with this, and that's the fact that when you change the is on value, even if it's through code, this on value change, the method that's attached here will run. So it's going to turn this to true, and then it's going to run this. And then even though the player didn't change it, it will change the save data to it being false when it was originally true. So what we have to do is we have to create an int array that's the same size. So all NGS values equals new int array, the same size as our other two arrays, and set these values to 0. Then in these setting 1 and setting 2 methods, we're going to say if all NGS values 0 is greater than or equal to 1, we put this in here, And if it's not, then we make it greater than or equal to 1. That way, what will happen is, the toggle will be off, the value is true, it's going to realize the value is 0, then it's not going to run this method, so our save data won't change, and then afterward, whenever the player wants to click on this, it will work in the method and the player data will change accordingly. However, there is one issue with this, and that's if, as said previously, if you change the isOn through code, it will run. But if you don't, then this method will not run. So you see how the isOn is false, so it's not on by default. Well, if the save data says it's not on, what will happen is this code won't run. And so the first time the player clicks the toggle will fire, but the code will not. So the toggle will be doing the exact opposite of what we want it to do. This is why it's important to set all these values to false, to uncheck the isOn by default. That way what we can do is we can say all NGS values I++. And now all we have to do is this for setting 2 as well. Just make sure to change all of these to 1. And now it should work. So I see that fires. Now let's see if it saved it. Alright, let's make sure it works for the second one too. We have a working save system now. I hope all the explanations I said made sense. Sometimes I'm not the best at explaining things.
So now on to the graphics settings, which is a more universal tab. If we look at this, what do we want to do? We want 6 presets, and in the custom preset, if they choose that preset, we want them to be able to change some settings individually. Now, if you go to File, Build Settings, Player Settings, Quality, you'll notice Unity's already done this all for you.
However, I don't particularly like how Unity set this up, so I'm going to change what they have by default here. Now, if you already know how to do this, already have something set up, or just want to do it by yourself, you can skip ahead to this timestamp or use YouTube chapters to skip ahead. But if you want to see how I did this, just continue watching. It's going to be on 2x speed, so if you want to slow it down to normal speed, just put the video playback on 0.5x. Alright, this was the second part of this series, and also the second to last part of this series. The next part, part 3, will be the last of this series about pause menus, and it'll pick off right from here. And it'll explain the presets I just made in this time lapse, and then also explain how to make an audio tab and show you how to implement an audio tab and all that stuff. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, maybe share it, and like this part, it'll come out in a week after this one releases, so thanks for watching, have a nice day, I hope to catch you in the next part of this series.